From dodging ATM fees and finding hidden hotel discounts, to all the coolest places to stay, in this video, I'm going to share everything you need to know for your very first trip to Peru. Now, in case you're new here, hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com. And this channel is all about practical travel tips from someone who's been there, done that, so be sure to like and subscribe if that sounds like your kind of thing. Now, I recently got to visit Peru for the very first time with my favorite eSIM company, Aerolo, who hosted us on the most amazing trip in Cusco, the Sacred Valley, and of course, Machu Picchu. I also spent 10 days traveling around independently as well for the sake of this thorough guide. I hope you find it helpful. Now let's begin with some Peru travel planning tips. This is a random one, but from first-hand experience, do make sure you memorize your passport number if you haven't already. Honestly, in all my years of travel, I have not needed my passport number as many times as I did for booking things in Peru. So yes, do know that you're going to need your passport number a lot. Next, before you get too ambitious with your itinerary, do know that Peru is quite big, with 24 regions, 196 provinces, and 3 distinct geographic areas to take note of. To help you get your bearings, we can roughly divide the parts of Peru that most tourists like to visit into 3 sections. The coast, including Lima, the Andes, home to Cusco and Machu Picchu, and the Amazon. Unfortunately, with how spread apart things are, it's not realistic to expect that you'll see all of Peru in one trip. It might look relatively compact on a map, but distances are long and travel can be slow. In fact, the bus from Lima to Cusco takes over 20 hours, so little wonder why most people choose to fly. With that said, a realistic visit tends to focus on just 1 or 2 regions unless you have a ton of time. On my trip, I spent time in Lima, Cusco, the Sacred Valley, and then a trip down to Puno to see Lake Titicaca, which, by the way, is the highest navigable lake in the world. I really enjoyed this itinerary, and I can definitely recommend it as a Peru's greatest hits kind of trip. Also, FYI, if you are planning on visiting Machu Picchu, I do have a full video all about the very complicated process that is visiting that incredible site, so be sure to check that out. Now, with all that said, do resist the urge to jam-pack your itinerary like crazy. Even when you do reduce your itinerary to just 1 or 2 regions, it's still very easy to try to pack so much into each day just because you're going to Peru, you want to make the most of it. But the unfortunate truth is things are spread apart, so most day trips have crazy early start times like 4 or 5 a.m. And realistically, you're not going to have a good time if every single day you're waking up for a 4 a.m. day trip. Now, in terms of arrivals, the main international airport is in Lima, and odds are you are probably going to be landing there at some point, even if your final destination is Cusco, which it is for many first-time visitors. Now listen, I know that long travel days suck, but honestly, at all costs, I would advise you schedule the longest possible layover you can in Lima. I would say a minimum of 3 hours, and if you can, just stay overnight. This is because when you enter Peru, you of course have to clear passport control in Lima, which can take a really long time because the lines there are long. And depending on the airline, they very often make you go to baggage claim, grab your bag, and recheck it once you get to Lima. And the same goes for the way home. That said, this does depend on the airline. When I was flying home, I flew with Sky and then connected with United. And I did in fact check my bag all the way to my home airport in Vancouver. So that was a huge relief. Unfortunately, they don't do this for every single airline. So do make sure you have enough time to potentially collect your bag if you need to, because otherwise you are going to be quite screwed. And yeah, honestly, if you have the time, do consider adding a longer stopover in Lima, maybe 1 or 2 nights, just to reduce the stress of that transfer. I know a lot of people don't prioritize Lima on a first trip because it's more of a modern city and they want to get to the mountains or whatever. I get it. But honestly, Lima's pretty cool. There is an amazing food scene and some really nice sites like the Malecón de Miraflores, which is this amazing seaside path with stunning views of the coast. And the Huacapucana ruins are honestly really neat as well. They're these 1500-year-old ruins, and there's a restaurant right on the site so you can eat overlooking these ruins, and the food is amazing. Now, when it comes to itinerary planning, I can't stress enough how important it is for you to plan around altitude to minimize altitude sickness. I think this is the #1 fear that a lot of travelers have when they go to Peru. And at the end of the day, altitude sickness is something that just strikes randomly and really impacts people differently. But I would do as much as you possibly can to minimize the chance that you're gonna get it. So in addition to making sure the first few days aren't going to be too labor intensive, I would also make sure you are looking at the elevations of all the destinations that you're going to. A lot of people, for instance, when they fly into Cusco, they go into Cusco and then do a day trip to Machu Picchu. But elevation-wise, that doesn't actually make sense because in terms of numbers, Cusco is at an 11,000 feet elevation, whereas Ollantaytambo, which is in the Sacred Valley, is 9,000. And if you go all the way to Aguascalientes, which is the village at the base of Machu Picchu, that's actually only about 6,700 feet. So if you go from Cusco Airport straight to Machu Picchu, that's actually going to be way easier for you to acclimate than if you spend a few days in Cusco. All that said, it does make sense for you to maybe get some medication just in case if you're really worried about it. Diamox is a really popular prescription one, but if you don't have time to get a prescription in advance of your trip, they actually sell Diamox over the counter in Peruvian pharmacies. So that's another really compelling reason maybe to spend a night or two in Lima before you go to Cusco, because then you can raid the pharmacies, buy some affordable Diamox, which I believe the generic term for that is acetazolamide. They also have some special herbal tablets as well that I found really helpful. For both packs, I paid about 30 Canadian dollars, so it's pretty affordable. Now, another super important thing is to make sure you have WhatsApp on your phone because they use it a lot for booking everything. Now, if you aren't familiar with WhatsApp, it's basically a messaging service that is connected to your phone number, but it uses mobile data to send messages and take calls. A lot of people use it for messaging friends abroad, so many of you might be familiar with it already. But if you aren't, do get familiar because in Peru, pretty much every type of booking happens on WhatsApp, from booking transport like taxis and shuttles, to even booking things like nail appointments. To use it though, you do need to make sure you have reliable mobile data on your phone. And for that, I can definitely recommend the sponsor of this week's video, Airlo, my go-to eSIM provider with packages for over 200 countries and regions, including Peru. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the term, eSIM stands for embedded SIM, meaning it comes pre-installed on your device and therefore connects you to local telecom networks 100% digitally as soon as you land, meaning no more annoying physical SIMs or pricey roaming. And trust me, you're going to be using data non-stop as soon as you arrive in Peru, like I did when I needed to book a shuttle to my hotel in Lima and could only find the driver because he WhatsApped me his location in the incredibly crowded and chaotic parking lot at Lima Airport. Thankfully, with the Airlo app, I was able to buy and install my Peru eSIM at the airport before taking off, which made my arrival super stress-free and allowed me to focus on more important things like finding a good spot for breakfast before we checked into our hotel. Again, data is a must in Peru because everything relies on it, from WhatsApping drivers and tour guides to translating menus to ensure you don't accidentally order alpaca. The best part is it can be super affordable too, because yes, Airlo is currently offering a limited time discount of 20% valid until the end of May. And even if you aren't traveling this month, you can easily buy an eSIM now and activate it later when your trip starts. So scan this QR code here to download the Airlo app and use the code HAPPY to save 20% off your first eSIM. All right, thanks again to Airlo for sponsoring this week's video and for bringing me to Peru in the first place. Now let's move on to our next tip, which is in terms of accommodation, do familiarize yourself with some common Peruvian chains to make your life a lot easier. Honestly, I'm not a super fussy person when it comes to accommodation, but my two main deal breakers are one, I really need a modern bathroom, and I also need air conditioning. So when I was narrowing down hotels in Peru, I did notice actually I kept gravitating towards the same chains and the same brands, and I realized these are just Peruvian chains that are known for having good value and modern amenities. So some good chains to look at include Casa Andina, which has a few different ones at different price points. We stayed at the Casa Andina Standard in Aguascalientes near Machu Picchu, and it was honestly awesome. It was right along the river. I'll be sure to link that in the description. They also have a really great loyalty program that gets you free late checkout if you stay 5 to 10 nights. And honestly, in one Peru trip, it's pretty easy to do that. So definitely look into that. There's also Tierra Viva, who we stayed with in Lima, and they have a few different properties across the country. And this isn't strictly Peruvian, but there's GHL as well, who are a Latin American chain. We stayed at their property on Lake Titicaca, which was beautiful, and also the Sinesta in Cusco, and yeah, both were great. The extra benefit of chains as well is that with a lot of them, if you have a Peru Rail ticket, you can actually get 20% off or more on some of these chains. Now, if you are up for a splurge though, do take note that Peru has a ton of really special destination hotels. So during our trip with Airlo, they spoiled us rotten and we stayed at some amazing places. The first one that I'll mention is the Belmont Monasterio in Cusco, which is housed in a 15th century monastery, and the property itself is just so peaceful and it's home to one of the most beautiful chapels in the entire city. And we also stayed at the Belmont Sanctuary Lodge, which is the most expensive hotel in Peru for a reason. It is located just steps away from the entrance of Machu Picchu. It is the only hotel that you can find up there, and if you're willing to splurge on it, honestly, nothing beats the feeling of just waking up and walking straight to the entrance, and everything there is full board, meaning your meals and your drinks are included, and there's also tons of activities as well. So that's also a very unique experience hotel that you can put on your list. Another bucket list property that we checked off on this trip was the Tambo del Inca in Urubamba. And I have to say, this place was probably my favorite hotel that we stayed at. It was just such a beautifully designed space, right by the river, surrounded by mountains. There were baby alpacas on site. The pool was gorgeous. The food was amazing. This was the breakfast buffet. I just have so many nice things to say about this property. So again, if you're looking for a splurge, that's a great one. Beyond just these typical luxury hotels though, there are so many cool experience hotels in the Sacred Valley. So for instance, really close to here, there is actually the Mountain View Lodge, which you've probably seen it. It's gone viral on social media because there are llamas that visit you while you soak in your hot tub. And there's also the Sky Lodges as well that are literally just pods dangling off the side of a cliff, and you have to climb to get up in them. So honestly, where else are you gonna have an experience like that? And all these hotels I've mentioned are of course on the pricier side, but there are some really unique accommodations as well that aren't necessarily gonna break the bank. So one thing that I really wish we had time for was when we were at Lake Titicaca, there are actually these islands known as the Uros Islands, and you can book a homestay with some of the local families that live on these islands, which are made out of reeds. But yes, you can find these properties on Airbnb and you basically live with a local family on an island on the lake, and it just looks really, really cool. Now, in terms of booking somewhere to stay, something that I have not seen mentioned in any guide that I think is so important is the fact that honking in Peru is like nothing I have ever heard. So be sure to book a hotel that is not on a busy street or else you will not get any sleep. And also when you're looking at reviews, do search up for keywords like noise or honking or whatever, because then it's gonna tell you how good the soundproofing is. Trust me, you do not want to book somewhere on a busy road. Another important tip I have is to actually check out some Peruvian YouTubers as well for some local insight. I found this really great creator on TikTok who walks around and compares the prices that she gets for things if she's asking in Spanish versus asking in English, and it's very eye-opening, and she shares a lot of businesses that are honest and give the same price regardless of which language you speak, so I think that's really cool. And Steph's Peru Travel Tips is also a really good general channel as well. Next is a tip I actually got from Steph that I would have never thought of myself, but is pretty important if you're someone like me who wears foundation or concealer. And that's to pack an extra thing of foundation that's one shade darker so that you can account for when you tan. Because apparently altitude sun is no joke, and I thought that this was a bit exaggerated, but I brought a second foundation anyway. And yes, it did come in handy because tell me how I got tan lines like this after being in the sun by the pool for less than an hour. I truly couldn't believe it. Now, another thing to be mindful of is that a lot of places actually have multiple names, so don't get them confused. In addition to some places just having multiple spellings, like Cusco with an S and Cusco with a Z, a lot of the time there are actually going to be different names for places in English, in Spanish, and depending on where you are, also in Quechua. So Rainbow Mountain is a really great example of this because in Quechua it's known as Vinicunca. In Spanish, they might call it the Montaña de Siete Colores. And in English, we call it Rainbow Mountain. So yes, if you see those different names, they do in fact refer to the same place. They are not different places. Now, in terms of the type of plug to pack, most commonly what you're gonna encounter are these Type-C plugs, which is what they use in Europe. But I did notice in a lot of hotels, they would also have the North American style Type-A plugs. So just bring a universal adapter to cover all your bases. All right, with those tips out of the way, now it's time to move on to Peru transport tips and getting around. First off, do know that domestic flights are the quickest and most efficient way to travel long distances in Peru. As I mentioned before, things are pretty spread apart. Even so-called day trips often require 3+ hours of driving each way, which to me is crazy because that's so much time in a car. So do know that when you are traveling, a lot of the time flights are actually going to be the easiest option and the most efficient. That said, there is a pretty robust long-distance bus system in Peru. These are going to be more affordable, of course, although I will say domestic flights in Peru tend to be pretty affordable. I feel like all the Lima to Cusco flights that I saw were like less than $150, so not bad. But if you're on a budget, local buses can do the job for much, much cheaper. The trouble is they also take a super long time, and depending on where you're going, language barrier can be an issue. Night buses in particular are a pretty great value in Peru because then you also save on the night's accommodation, and a lot of these buses are built with sleep in mind. In fact, when you're booking, a lot of the time they will specify how many degrees your chair can lean back. going all the way to 180. So I was actually on a bus. I took the Inca Express from Cusco to Puno, and I couldn't believe how far this chair could recline. And it felt like I was just like sleeping in a bed the whole time, which is pretty cool. In between, there are also long distance bus companies that are more geared towards tourists. So two big companies that kind of are known for this include Peru Hop and Cruz del Sur. I've heard better things about Cruz del Sur, but I don't have personal experience. So if you have any opinions, please be sure to leave them in the comments. These ones tend to be more expensive than just the regular buses, but they do come with tourist-friendly amenities like English-speaking guides and things like that. Now, if you're up for a swankier adventure, do know that Peru actually has some really cool luxury train rides as well. If you're one of those the journey is the destination type people, like I am, then these are definitely worth looking into. Most people already know about the train to Machu Picchu. I do cover that in depth in my Machu Picchu guide, but there are some really nice sightseeing trains as well. I personally took the Peru Rail Titicaca train from Puno to Cusco, and oh my gosh, it was probably one of my favorite experiences of the entire trip. Basically, it's this 11-hour luxury train ride through the Peruvian highlands with a 3-course gourmet lunch, onboard entertainment, afternoon tea just before you leave, a bar cart, an open-air observatory cart, and yeah, the views are just spectacular. And for those with more time, there's also the Belmont Andean Explorer, which follows a similar journey to what I mentioned, but then you also go all the way to Arequipa, and because it's a longer journey, you can also sleep on board, and so the price tag shoots up accordingly. But yes, Arequipa I've heard is an amazing city. I really wish I had time for it, but maybe next time. I will say within cities though, pre-booked taxis or Ubers are probably the best way to get around. At all costs, do avoid just flagging a taxi off of the street because you never know if this is going to be a legitimate taxi that charges you a fair rate. Especially when you've just arrived in a new destination like train stations and airports, things can start to feel chaotic really quickly because people are just trying to grab your attention. In most cases, if these people are licensed, like if they show you that they have a lanyard and that they are official, they aren't actually scammers. There are some areas like at Puno train station, for instance, where the only taxi drivers that can come into this space are the licensed ones. Same at Lima Airport, only at the front part of the airport though. So if you are leaving Lima Airport and you see that there's rows of official taxis, those are legit, but as soon as you cross over to the parking lot, there will be tons of guys in shirts that are offering you rides, and these guys can be very scammy. And they are so aggressive that it is just incredibly overwhelming. One trick that I've heard of that I did witness in person is they'll just be like, oh, I can take you into the city for 50, but they don't specify the currency. So obviously you're thinking 50 soles, but in reality, when you get there, they're gonna be like 50 US dollars. So don't fall for it. And a lot of these guys will straight up lie to you as well. I had booked a shuttle and I was looking for my shuttle driver. They were saying, oh, the shuttle doesn't come until 9 a.m., which obviously it does because I had the guy's number and he was already there. So be careful at Lima Airport. There's a lot of scams if you leave the official taxi section, which is just in front of arrivals. In any case, I do think your life will be way easier if you just pre-order rides. I did this a few times with Taxi Datum, and they were consistently excellent. I got a ride with them from Cusco Airport to Ollantaytambo for $35 US, which is so affordable. And Taxi VIP was also really great in Puno. All right, now let's tackle some Peru sightseeing and attraction tips. First off, before you book with any tour company, read a ton of reviews and also go on Reddit. There are so many tour companies in Peru. Honestly, not all of them are amazing. If you go on Reddit, you're gonna read tons of horror stories. The ones that I have read are honestly mind-boggling, from companies that will just straight up cancel your tour the day before for Machu Picchu and leave you stranded with no tickets, to inexperienced guides literally leading people into the Amazon and getting lost and not knowing what to do, basically. So yeah, if you wanna book with a reputable company, make sure you are not skipping reviews. Anecdotally, I have heard that if you book in person compared to online, a lot of the time you're gonna find a better deal. I did actually notice this to be true when I was walking around Cusco. I saw a lot of day tours with local agencies were a little bit cheaper than what I saw online. But at the end of the day, when you book online, you have the ease of mind. You know what the name of the company is. You can read reviews. To me, that is worth the extra money that you paid. Now, when you start sightseeing around Peru, a lot of the time what you're gonna see are guides that are waiting at the entrance offering their services. And for this, I would say guides are actually often worth the money. Just be sure to clarify the price up front and also vet for vibes. Honestly, when you're visiting ruins especially, having that historical context is really going to enrich the experience so much, because otherwise you're basically just looking at mounds of rocks, right? So if context matters to you, these guides that are at the entrances, they tend to actually be licensed guides and they tend to be very good. So I actually hired one at Sacsayhuaman in Cusco, and my guide was amazing. He spoke like 7 languages. He'd been doing it for 40 plus years. So DM me on Instagram if you want his contact info. Now, another thing, do be very careful with novelty passport stamps like at Machu Picchu. I haven't personally heard of anyone actually getting in trouble for having these stamps in their passport, but depending on the country that issued it, a lot of the time they are actually going to have rules about what technically invalidates your passport. So with an American passport, for instance, it does actually say on there, only authorized officials may place stamps or make notations or additions to this passport. And while obviously a random souvenir shop in Peru isn't going to qualify as an official authority. So bring an extra notebook or something to get stamped. Don't just stamp your actual passport. Okay, next tip. This might sound super silly, but do learn the difference between an alpaca and a llama because you are going to see both throughout your time in Peru, and it's nice to know what the difference is. So usually llamas are bigger than alpacas, and alpacas have smaller, cuter, squishier faces compared to llamas who kind of have longer faces. And llamas generally have ears that are more banana-shaped compared to alpacas who kind of have like little triangle-shaped ears. Oh, and llamas spit more apparently, so now you know. Alrighty, now let's move on to some Peru tips for once you arrive. First off, do learn a few basic Spanish phrases to be polite and to also make your visit much smoother. English isn't really widely spoken outside of the main touristy areas, and they do really appreciate you making an effort in Spanish. So some basics to know include hello, which is hola, thank you, which is gracias, please, which is por favor, excuse me, which is con permiso when you are trying to get past people, and disculpe when you're trying to get someone's attention. Now, something else that's crucial to know are numbers, because you are going to use them a lot. Even when you get into Ubers now, I noticed in Peru there was a thing where you had to give the driver a PIN just to verify the ride and make sure it was safe for everyone. So yeah, obviously you could just show them the numbers, but I think it's easier if you know the numbers and you can read it out loud. And even if you do speak some Spanish, there might be some Peruvian slang that you're not familiar with. Honestly, that's quite an advanced consideration to make, but if you want to learn a bit more about Peruvian slang, I'm gonna link to a really good Fluent U article that has a lot of words that you can take note of. And I will say, if you're visiting the Andes, knowing a bit of Quechua is going to be much appreciated. Quechua is the language of Peru's largest indigenous group and is spoken by 3 million people in Peru. So if you're visiting the Andean region, at least learn how to say thank you, which as I learned, the easier way to say it is anyay. But in addition to Quechua, there's actually almost 50 different indigenous languages in Peru. So depending on where you are, learning more about the local indigenous people and their language can really help enrich your trip. Next, it's time to move on to something very important, which is to try as much of the local cuisine as possible. I don't know if you've heard this, but Peruvian food is absolutely incredible. Some of the national dishes that you'll definitely want to try include ceviche, which is Peru's most famous dish, made with fresh raw fish cured in citrus. Ají de gallina, which is a creamy chicken dish. Causa, which is a layered potato dish, often filled with tuna or chicken. And of course, the legendary lomo saltado, which is a stir fry that is usually made with beef, served with rice, and also fries. Now, the cool thing about this dish in particular is that it actually represents a sub-niche of Peruvian cuisine known as chifa, which is the umbrella term that they use for a lot of the Peruvian Cantonese fusion dishes that are super popular in Peru. Now, as someone of Cantonese descent, that was actually so fun for me to see, just because a lot of the foods that I grew up with kind of have representation in Peru. So fried rice is a really common chifa dish, and they actually call it chaufa, which is so similar to the Cantonese word for it. And even in English, when we say soy sauce, they say siyao, which is like the Cantonese word for it. So I don't know, I just thought that was really cool. And in terms of dessert, they have tons of tasty local fruits, like for instance, the lucuma, which they use in a bunch of desserts because it's this creamy, magical fruit that just tastes like caramel and maple syrup. I had a tiramisu with it and it was unreal. Another favorite of mine is the chirimoya, which is known as custard apple because it's so sweet and creamy. And in general, just a bunch of passion fruit or maracuya adjacent fruits, which were so good in juices and desserts. In general though, all the fruit here is amazing, so like mango, dragon fruit, all of it, so fresh and delicious, so make sure to take advantage. Now for more budget-friendly eats, you can visit markets, go to street food stalls, and veer away from the tourist center. One of the things I really appreciated about Peru is that you can find great eats at every single price point. The farther away you get from the tourist center, the lower the prices go, and I'll be honest with you, some of the prices that I saw sincerely shocked me. So yes, don't be afraid to venture away from the touristy area and go eat at some local restaurants. Obviously, the vibe is a little bit different, but you can get some really affordable and delicious food that way. Now, in terms of food safety, another thing to be mindful of is that you should not be drinking tap water. Make sure you're always drinking bottled or filtered water, even when you're brushing your teeth, just to be on the safe side. Another thing in terms of altitude sickness, coca tea is a very common and effective remedy. A lot of people get freaked out by this because these are the same leaves that they use for cocaine, but trust me, you're not gonna get high off of this tea. It actually, to me, tastes a lot like Japanese green tea, really, really earthy and delicious. And if you're not into that, another alternative is munya tea, which is great for altitude sickness as well. It is a kind of Andean mint, so really, really yum. Something that came in really handy for my trip as well that I would highly recommend is to pack a little emergency kit with you that has Imodium, some sachets of electrolytes, blister pads, and things like that. I used this kit so much more than I expected, and it genuinely saved my life on a few occasions. I personally found electrolyte packs to be an absolute lifesaver with altitude sickness just because they help you hydrate better. So I brought a few packs of those, and anytime I was starting to get a headache, I just down a bottle of water with electrolytes and I felt instantly better. So definitely bring a few of those with you. And when it comes to a rumbly stomach, Imodium to the rescue every single time. Also be aware that tipping isn't really a big thing in Peru. Rounding up or doing 10% max tends to be the norm. In more tourist-oriented places though, there might be an expectation that you tip more just because they know you typically do. Now, when you're out and about, do always ask for permission before you take photos of locals. A lot of the time you're gonna notice that if there's a really nice looking photo op, let's say they've got a really cute baby alpaca, most of the time they are expecting a tip in return for that photo. But in any case, it's always good to ask permission. Another thing, always carry cash, especially when you're outside of major cities. Cards are accepted in many places, but I did notice a lot of the time the businesses do kind of pass on the transaction fees to you. So if you're paying with card, it's gonna cost you at least 5% more. So just have some cash on you. Though if you are paying with card, something to note is the difference between paying con quotas and sin quotas. So the first time I paid with card, this popped up and I was like, oh, I had no idea what that meant. So basically what quotas are like installments. So if you say con quotas, it means you want to pay with installments. I don't even think foreign cards can do that. So don't press con quotas, always put sin quotas because that just means you're not going to pay in installments. Also be very careful which ATMs you're using to avoid fees. I used a few different ATMs and I was so mad every single time I accidentally picked one that had fees. So BBVA, fees. Don't go with them. The fees are absurd. Go with Banco de la Nación or the ATMs that are attached to them because those ones aren't going to charge you. When you have cash though, do try to break your bills as quickly as possible because a lot of the time the ATM is going to give you really big bills. And let me tell you, on this trip, I was a very generous tipper just because I had nothing but big bills. So try to break those as soon as you can, especially because you're gonna need coins for things like public toilets and also for tipping and things like that. Now, on that note, when it comes to bathrooms in Peru, oftentimes you're not meant to flush the toilet paper. So even in nicer hotels, a lot of the time you're gonna see signs that say that you shouldn't be flushing toilet paper down the pipe. So do take note of those and also look at context clues. If you see a basket and there's a lot of toilet paper in there, odds are you're not meant to flush the toilet paper. Now, another important tip when you're shopping, do make sure you do all your souvenir shopping before you get to the airport. Now, I know that this is common sense. A lot of the time, the airport, it's a lot more expensive, but honestly, the markup that I saw for the same souvenirs at the Lima airport, like I truly couldn't believe it. Like a little llama doll that would cost 20 soles outside at a market was all of a sudden marked up to 180. So definitely make sure you buy all your souvenirs before you get to the airport because the prices there were shocking. Although do be careful when you're buying souvenirs because something that was really strange on my flight home that I didn't realize was a thing was I've never had this before. We obviously went through the security check, right, with all our carry-on bags. And then when we were boarding, there were tables set up and staff members there waiting to look through your carry-on bags again to check for any liquids that exceeded 100 mils. So I was really shocked by this because I had a bottle of sunscreen that got through security check fine and a bottle of water. And they went through my bag. They genuinely looked inside every single packing cube and they discarded my sunscreen. And this apparently catches a lot of people off guard. They even discard any items that you bought after airport security, which I think is crazy. So do keep this in mind. Apparently this is for all North American bound flights. I'm not sure if they do it for other destinations, but yeah, just something to be mindful of at Lima Airport. They apparently check your bags again at boarding, which I didn't expect. When you are doing your shopping though around town, do make sure you get the right receipt if you want a tax refund. Tourists in Peru are actually eligible for a tax refund so long as they pay by card and they are spending more than 100 soles in a transaction. To get the refund though, you have to make sure you have a specific type of invoice that is very specific to this purpose. So I'm gonna link to a resource down below that explains what you need to get, but just generally when you're shopping, do get a feel for prices before you commit. Because what I noticed was that a lot of the souvenir shops sell more or less the exact same stuff, but the price that they give you will vary so wildly because every single person will give you a different price. So it does make sense for you to just ask around. Like, let's say for me, I really wanted to buy some cute llama dolls. And so I was constantly asking how much it was at every stall. And then after some time, I kind of saw what the average price was. But in addition to going to the mass-produced souvenir stalls, there are tons of amazing local designers and artisans. Like, I bought this really awesome top with these super cool sleeves from a brand in Cusco called Pukias. Really, really cool stuff. So yeah, a lot of the time you'll see the same sort of fake Patagonia fleeces and things. Nothing against those, but there are also lots of great local designers to support. Got this awesome ring as well from a local shop in Cusco. It's lots of cool stuff. Lastly, if you are a dog person like me, I do have to mention, in Peru, you are going to see a lot of stray dogs. I know that they are so cute and a lot of them do look really well taken care of, but do take necessary precautions because most of them, 99% of them, are completely fine. They are friendly, they are going to attack you, but all it takes is one negative experience to just really ruin your trip. So if you're ever in a situation where you are being chased by a stray dog or you're not sure what to do, apparently the best course of action is to bend down and pretend like you're picking up a rock, because a lot of these dogs are conditioned to fear people throwing rocks at them. God, that makes me so sad. But yes, just keep that in mind and also keep your distance, unfortunately, if you can, because as cute as they are, you just don't want to risk it. All right, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more travel videos just like this one, and I'll see you next time.